Go ahead. So you've seen this to a degree with people getting backed into a corner, particularly inside. So the first thing we talk about with terrain is walls in general. So if I'm pushed into a corner, I can't swing as much. I'm limited particularly on side swings. If you're on this wall, because I tend to attack from this side, being right-handed, and I'm less limited. But if you're on this wall, I have a lot more lock into my mobility. So if you're right-handed and I'm right-handed, putting my right side to the wall and your side away from the wall will tend to give you an advantage. The other thing with this is, in the fundamental striking class, we did circular strikes and striking to the point. So if I'm pushed up against this wall, I can't do my large arc swings if you're kind of narrowing in to try and cut, but I can cut straight down, like striking to the point. So part of the counter to having to fight in an enclosed space is striking to the point and not trying to make a big arc swing, which would hit the wall. I can strike just down this way, and then because I can't bring the sword around, well, that was a bad example. So I can bring the sword around, I can pitch up and then straight at this angle, right? So you can strike this way and not have to bring that sword around and hit. My reflex was to do a full swing, that's why I hit the wall, but the point being in that this and this allow me to attack and fight in a corner. Does it put me at a disadvantage because I can't use circling strikes? Yes, but striking to the point is the counter. So if we inverse this, and I'm coming at you, you should be able to basically swivel the pommel and strike from the hip, right? Able to strike in back at this, but even if you wanted to strike under my sword, so I push over, and you wanted to, well, engage the swords first. So we stack here, and then I'm pushing, so you want to surrender. You can surrender and then attack back down, even in the corner, right? So if I'm attacking, I'll try and move you to a wall and then attack from the outside to prevent you from being able to do that, but you can just strike to the point to try and counter that space, okay? It's a limitation, and it means that you're going to be way more tired having to, if we remember the striking fundamentals class with that, striking to the to the point, force towards the opponent, discards the use of energy when you throw it straight forward. Because of that, you can't conserve any power at all. It's all straight in, so you have static blocks. So even though I'm in the corner and I'm able to deal with the strikes, you can still continue to use circling attacks to conserve energy, where I can't because I am limited by my space. So you counter the corner by striking to the point. You counter someone striking the point in the corner by standing back a little bit, doing your circling attacks, and maintain your energy levels. Let them tire out because it's harder for them to fight in that position and limiting their movement. If I do forget I'm in a corner and then strike back, it creates a stop. You just draw a line in, but you want to try and draw it in on the weapon, right? And then now I can't do anything. From the way you had it before, if you just struck in with that thrust, I can still strike back. So you're going to block the weapon, false edge, catch the weapon in there, okay? The other thing is, even not in the corner, so I have the side swings here. If I have my back to a wall, and this is something we do with the defending the wall drill, I can't do like break window position. I can't bring any sword around the back. It still limits all of my movements. So I'm still doing sort of the cuts. Now I can do circular strikes, but because I have a limited momentum, and it's only hand or wrist, I'm going to wear out my hands here more. I can't use the full body movement that I can do from out here to save my energy, right? I'm stuck in a very tight arm pattern. I can get somebody into it, but I can't get a full arm swing. So again, you're gonna waste energy. Keep them pressured against the wall. Keep using circling attacks, moving side to side, but sort of casually, not exerting yourself to the point where you're gonna tire yourself out. The whole point is that you wanna try and kind of maneuver me in to a corner and have me fight very much a, kind of position where you have the energy advantage on top of the mobility advantage. And just remember that you can always back out. And if you can't, that when you're in the corner, you've got those cutting to the points. You also have thrust to try and cause me to back up. Whenever you thrust, you can create a space, and that gives you your opening to try and move out and around, right? So now you have space away from the wall. I can try and drive you back in, but you rotate out. So constantly being aware of creating that opportunity up with a thrust or with a push in to rotate sideways to get yourself out of the corner so that I don't have the energy advantage. Again, we talked about sidewalls. If you're right-handed, I push you against this wall, you're far more limited. If I push you against this wall, you're opening and I'm closed, right? So the wall makes a difference of which side it's on. You want to constantly think about, well, if I'm right-handed, I'd rather have you on this wall. It's not the same equality, and the same thing with the back. In fact, if you're in the corner but further away, but like in that corner, I can limit your movement. Now you're striking with short strikes to the point to try and control. But if you take a step forward, maybe one more step forward. All right, now I can't really move around you and actually not be in your threat range. So anywhere I present, you're here, and you have full motion to bring the sword around your back, right? At that position to the wall, you can't be flanked. If you have even multiple, I think it's my phone alarm. If you have multiple people trying to stand off, I can have a person here and then a person over here, but it limits the number of spots that we can swing at because I need roughly this space, right? I can have one person there, one person roughly here, away from the wall, but even a person here is kind of getting in the way of the other two. So we become limited, and if you're capable to do the circling, swinging strikes that we talked about when you're fighting multiple enemies, you've limited the number of opponents that you ever have to fight to a max of about 3 and a 45-degree wall. So if you're fighting 10 people and you can't move in a corridor or whatever in this particular position, until you get in a bind and I can pressure down, the other ones can't really engage you much. If you remember, for fighting multiple enemies, the thing was you don't ever want to bind, you want to swing through. So if I go in that bind, you want to pull out, release, and keep going to threaten at the other opponents. So you have maximum 3. Hopefully somebody moves in, you dispatch that one person. Still, it's 3 versus 1, but they're actually to some degree better off with 2 because this guy's going to be swinging in the way of the other 2. So, yeah. So, this is in reference to walls. Walls are far more limiting because they're solid there, but I gotta stop my phone, that's driving me crazy. Okay. So, in a lot of in some tournaments they used list or barricades for their fighting arenas, and they'll be roughly this tall as this line, right? So the cool thing with that is a lot of sword work will come over and would miss the list, right? So you can do the back swings, meaning that you can make the corner tighter. The space that we were talking about here, you need that space so you can move the sword behind you and swing around. So if you can imagine that you have a list coming up to roughly this high around you, from there, if you're swinging around behind you, you're clear to move. But the two offenders attacking you, pushing together in a smaller space, which absolutely puts it down to only two people attacking at once. Again, in a field scenario where you have a list fighting in a corner, as long as you can handle the two people you're fighting, if they're a like deficient skill level compared to you, you're using sweeping attacks. Not only that is, if I try and push on you, and you can push your back against the list, you have support that I don't have. So now suddenly you're able to use the list, and at this range, it's even difficult for another person to engage, right? Like if you can slide close to your body weight behind me, then you can use that angle in front of me at close measure, like we did in fighting multiple enemies, to keep this person from attacking. And it's so small an area that a third person can't hardly get in here. If I get my sword free at all, I would swing and this person would possibly take a hit from me as much as they would from you. So you can use that corner to fend off multiple enemies, particularly when you have a list setting. If you're doing like a 3-on-3 or whatever, better to fight two people in a corner than three in the opening where they can create a triangle around you, right? If you have that ability to swing behind, you can harass, you can do Zerkal without the impediment of a wall. You can't do undercuts as well, but you can do an undercut from the chest area down. So a list isn't the same issue as fighting in the corner of a wall. A wall pretty much shuts down all those attacks. A list does not. And it really makes it easier to fight 1 versus 2. Low roofs, of course, stop vertical swings, so you would do side to side. When I say low, I'm 6'3". This sword's probably about 5 foot, so I want to be able to swing all the way up. That means I need, what, an 11-foot roof? A lot of houses are 8 or 9 feet, so I'd be doing this and hitting the roof.
You're restricted too.
Right, so you're doing circling. You can circle generally over your head in like an 8-foot room and do Zerkal to go for your high swings. But that also means that Zerkal becomes your high guard position, because you can't do this. If you want to do a high attack, you come up to here and then you're swinging this way, right? Because you can do the lateral, but you can't do the vertical. That also allows you to attack from the outside because of the properties of Zerkal. So if you're fighting multiple people inside of a low-roofed area, you can kind of flank around outside the weapon, which you can't do with lower guard positions. That'll also favor people who are shorter. For example, I'm going to have less clearance above my head. So if I just barely have clearance to raise my sword, you actually have an advantage with Zerkal over the head against me in a lower roof position. Because if I risk hitting my head here, and you can helicopter around, you have this ability to cut around and then cut back around, and I don't really have much of an ability to deal with that. Even my sword can't go any higher than this. You're going to be hitting strong on my weak from this position, and I can't go up to actually be strong, so you're going to outpower that. Now, we're not going to have that usually in like a tournament scenario. Usually they find as much opening as we can, paint a circle in the middle of a room, to remove all those. But if you ended up fighting in a spot like this, you can absolutely look like, if I stand on the edge of the arena here, in some ways it's like a list. I can fight freely, and then I can move side to side. But if you get pushed into a situation with a corner where I'm driving back here, I can move side to side and really limit your ability where you're out. Cages and corridors. Cages comes into play in some places. They had cages at Tengen in Tokyo for a while, and they had the issue of that the cages were tipped at the corners, so it had like a dome shape almost. It wasn't like straight walls before they tore it down. Now they just have an open room and you have like a balcony that looks down, but it used to have almost like a tipped corner. And so if you're fighting on the edge, you could hit that tipped roof. But if you're fighting in the middle, you're all clear. I think it was it was kind of, they tried to make it round, but it was more like an octagon, which meant there was sort of mini corners at each of the bends. And in those cases, you could push someone in those bends and have the advantage of cutting their side-to-side movement. The place you'd actually want to stand, because from like an animal brain instinct, you kind of want to push into the corner. That's your thought process. Like you feel safer because it's more closed. But you actually want to fight in the middle of like the octagon walls because it gives you the most berth on each side. Same thing with the corridors, and similar with the fighting multiple enemies with swivel step. We talked about how that can be used in corridor fighting, closing down a hallway. Doors, and any kind of like through hole. You don't want to stand in the door. 3 people can attack into a doorway. You take 1 step back from the door, however, and then suddenly only 1 person can attack through at a time. Didn't matter how many people you have, unless they shove the guy through to get killed and climb over his body. You're fighting 1 guy at a time, similar to the fighting the space in the field. A little more hemo-likely, with a lot of the tournaments, with the circles or with the cone squares, there are points for stepping out of bounds. I know they do that in SoCal too. So one thing is, you can use that partly as a distraction, or partly as just a way to gain point for people who aren't paying attention. In the square ones, it's even easier. Like the round one, it's roughly a wall, and even though you'll see it come in, you kind of have an idea of the circle. But people who aren't good at space relations will have a little more trouble with a square because they can step this 1 foot out thinking of this line. So if I'm pushing back on you, let's use the square of this, like that square though. Yeah, step to right, like there. So you see this corner here? Yeah. If that was the corner of the arena, when you have somebody pushing in, there's a tendency, I'm on this side, so you see this line. Yeah. But because it's straight, it doesn't give you a good...
I don't see this corner here, and I go out of...
Right. Well, so you'll see this line, and you'll know where it is because I'm on this side of you attacking. But the line behind you is the one that you don't see. So people who are tracking my sword in this position, if you turn into an attack on this, are more likely to foot out
of bounds
and get a point. So you can use that to your advantage because there's no hit frame or palisade or wall there. If you were trying to get a 1-point lead on somebody by deliberately turning in line with a wall, fighting down the wall where you can see this line, and even if they don't step out for the point, as long as you know you're over the 50% line, pushing them back, you're playing a mental game of them having to like what's over that half of their attention is going off. So in these square arenas, it's a lot easier to trick people into not focusing on the fight or accidentally step out of the ring. In the round arenas, which is why they tend to be the more popular arenas, there's sort of a convergence, and that an arc follows around, and even if you see this one line, you kind of get the gist.
Body along. Yeah.
Right, and they can also not get stuck in the corner, hence why those are the more popular arenas. But there's still people who use square arenas because of circumstances and easier to measure out and so forth. Just something to be aware of, being able to use the line, like if you're fighting down that line towards me to try and push me back towards. Now, as soon as you swing from the outside, I'm going to want to tend to move and get out of that corner.
So I need to trap you back into this corner.
Right. So you want to try and constantly swing from this side and try and push me back, but you want to do it from that area.
Here.
Because if you turn, I'm going to see the line, and I know how far I have to go. If you stay on this side and always attack from this, and then, you're feinting and making me having to block this, I'm more likely to step out and more likely not to see the line because I need to keep my vision on you. And this is less HEMA, more duels and so forth, but in the case of open terrain, some HEMA tournaments are in grass, like you said, with the potholes and the sticks. Some people will see this as slightly dirty, but if you're aware that there's a pothole, from a swordsmanship standpoint, being aware of your terrain and trying to drive your opponent into those potholes deliberately makes sense. From a fair fight, casual sporting standpoint, no. So it depends on sort of the atmosphere of it, right? If you're going into a friendly sport, on the other hand, if you have somebody who's been a jerk to you all day, and you feel like you owe them one, or if it's intended to be sort of a cutthroat tournament, yeah. So we know what really happened to your foot. But sticks and debris, potholes,
pushing them into mud.
But pushing your opponent into it, or also being aware.
Or poking them towards the frozen river so they slide in the ice and bonk their head on that place.
But if, let's say you're the honorable fighter and you're looking at it from a friendly sportsmanship, you might warn the guy and say, hey, watch out, there's a pothole there. You might
Or I would hope the event organizer would fill the potholes in or put markers over them or something.
Or you would hope. But
or maybe not put the sparring area in the midst of all the potholes, if able. Yeah.
There's some degree of somebody cut the grass and didn't see it there. You find it early in your match with your foot. You see the guy heading for it, and you could be like, hey, watch out for that. But part of the warning here is if you're fighting in a grass field where potholes can be hidden by grass and so forth.
To be cognizant of the risk as you're moving.
Because it could be that your opponent is not a good sportsman.
When you do the backwards lunge and you collapse into it and then you fall and your whole body collapses onto your foot and you get a severe grade 2 ankle sprain.
But they're
totally not real thing that happened.
More than a few smaller tournaments where they fight in grassy areas that aren't their own. And even if they staked out the place before and they thought they found good spots, there could be a bump or something that
there could be a really big snail.
Whatever, but...
no, people on the Habu Trail, they go running at night when those giant Okinawan snails come out, and they trip over them because it's pretty much a boulder in the path, and this is a steep hill going up or down, and there's people that have torn their ACLs because of snails on the Habu Trail on Fatima.
Okay.
So actual...
I know they have big snails here, but...
so you could technically get... everybody's snail.
but the point being, though, with any obstacle like that, even if you're thinking it's a unsportsmanly thing, whatever, that doesn't mean your opponent is. So being aware that those are things that people can do to you being aware that someone's deliberately trying to drive you down the line to get you to step out, you'd be like, well, that's not very good swordsmanship. But there is and there isn't, because it is a combat sport. You're looking for whatever advantage. So on one hand, if you're risking hurting somebody, like what happened to William, I'd be like, okay, potholes and all that, let's not hurt people. On the other hand, with the fighting down the line,
out of bounds on a flat, yeah. So part of that is definitely when you're participating to be cognizant of where the bounds are, whether it's shaped like a circle, a square, or if they made a triangle or something.
Right.
Because, or getting backed into walls, because a lot of times I've seen people in here and they'll get backed into the wall by their opponent who's intentionally backing them into it, and they're so focused on what they're doing, like they're parrying, their cuts, their defending action, whatever they're doing, that they're not aware spatially of this wall backing. And I've seen people bounce into the wall, like literally impact into the wall, or to where they're completely have no advantage. And it's like you demonstrated earlier, where you're so narrow and you're very limited on what actual cutting and blocking you can, like striking and blocking you can do from here, because they've allowed themselves to be backed into the wall. And same thing with going out of bounds is if you notice you're getting close to this, you should have the peripheral vision, or just in general the awareness of where your body's positioned to avoid that in the first place. And if you see it and you're here, counter, and you pull out to the side, you can pull out back and movement. So it's like part of the awareness of they're going to use it against you, you can use it against them, but you shouldn't allow it to happen.
Right, and 100% agreeing with that. If you're not in a tournament, there's no rule against putting someone in a corner. Like, in a friendly match, it's kind of like, look what I did. I'm actually for it outside of the tournament. In most tournaments, they're going to set it up, like you say, the circles and the squares, in a place where they've cleared to make sure that doesn't happen. But from a swordsmanship standpoint of manipulating your opponent and putting them at disadvantage, using the arena that you're in to do that, as long as it's no one's getting hurt and you're not trying to do anything deliberate hurt, I actually feel like
it's a tactical manipulation of the environment, and you're taking advantage of the lack of awareness that they're showing when you do that.
Right. And so I'm all for using corners, walls in friendly matches. And if we run a tournament, avoiding corners, walls, potholes. Potholes are a little more dangerous.
Well, I think for clarity of judging, like being able to see everything and keeping it in one space, and where it's not, they're moving from here to like 3 blocks that way to do it in a court.
Well, and I would say also
people can take advantage of the tactics of pushing them out of there and out of there.
I would say also in a tournament, even if you clear a space, right? If you're fighting in grass, people fall, hit their sword on the ground.
Yeah.
The next person
gouging out components.
Right. Next person gouges it with a heel and whatever, and then you had a pothole that wasn't there before. You secured everything when you set up the tournament. When you're fighting, you find that pothole with your foot. It's something that someone can take advantage of without the judges necessarily paying attention to it, because they're paying attention to the sword and where it hit, and they're not necessarily looking at the ground, they're looking at the fighters. It could slip by unless they're doing like inspections or something of the fighting area between fights. And so the smaller the tournament, the more likely you're going to have stuff like that. The bigger tournaments are going to be more in basketball gyms and taped off and all this. But even just for the risk of like hurting your ankle, it's good to be cognizant of those things. For the sake of completion, I included some things that will hopefully never be in any tournament. So variations in environment, not used in HEMA, and in fact, if you see them, you should call them out for safety aspects. But similar to tearing up potholes, if you're fighting in a grassy area, and we've actually seen this some outside, it rained yesterday, today's dry, but under the grass, still some mud.
Yeah.
So somebody steps in the same spot a few times and suddenly you get a slippery spot.
Slick, yeah.
You could totally steer somebody into that. You could also warn someone that spot's there. And being aware of those slippery spots, I've had a few times where I almost ate it. So the same thing of 3 different actions. 1, mark it off. 2, deliberately use it. And 3, warn people. And be cognizant that you don't fall into that trap. sand and shallow water. So I don't know if you ever run on sand.
I have.
So you're aware of
I'm a
the...
Marine. I've run on sand.
I assumed so, but I didn't want to just assume.
I mean, I also just run at the beach sometimes. Anyway.
But you're aware of the energy loss
Yeah.
in running on
You're
sand.
sinking in, and you have to propel yourself back out of it.
Right, and even if it seems like pretty loose, the amount of energy you lose running on sand because it doesn't push back and bounce you as you go, and it absorbs the impact and spreads it out, really drains you. Similar water, even to a very small degree, like let's say you, like asphalt or something, it's hard underneath, it's not sinking. That water absorbs the initial impact, spreads it out, and therefore it's super tiring. And then there's even like a minor suction effect for pulling up out of water,
yeah.
similar to sand. So you may be like, it's not that much water. It can make it a little bit slippery. It can make it way more draining to fight. Fighting in sand, like if we had a tournament on the beach or something like that, would be super exhausting.
You don't want to do like shirtless beach volleyball, Top Gun, but with like synthetic.
Not me particularly. I would also say the thing with water and sand at low levels, not like up to your waist levels, but at low levels
Like
is the
level.
fear of like kicks and like splashing water in the face or throwing sand in somebody's eyes as a distraction. I mean, you're like, splashing water isn't super effective, but if you take the tip of your sword and then drop it and then
boom,
splash,
and it's an arc.
Right. It's enough. It's similar to the cloak thing in that you blind somebody temporarily, you get it on their face, they can't see
And
particularly
then they
well.
could lose their footing, and then you can pressure them in.
Right. So this is a weird one too. High and low ground. So this is partly in here because of stupid Star Wars reference. The thing is, high ground with melee weapons, with the exception of pole arms, is a worse position. If I'm raising my feet to your waist level, because of the measure arc, I have a harder time hitting a lower target. I'm also presenting my feet as a much easier target for you.
So I'm down here.
Right.
And I've got it.
So I'm having a harder chance to hit your head, shoulder, legs, but if you go for my ankles, you're going to find it a relatively easy shot. Then what? I can't walk?
Yeah.
So if I have a pole arm, it's a lot longer range.
You just stab down.
You're stabbing
Into the
down.
head,
So pole arms and spears, high ground, yes. Archery, high ground, yes. But in a swordsmanship battle, you don't want the high ground. You don't want to be in this position of losing my reach at your head while giving you greater reach at my legs. I can't get close to you for snipe shots. And all my attacks have to come from down. You can do undercuts and thrust, and you can also attack from overcut. So I have to defend all the angles, and I have to do it at a lower position of center than I'm normally used to. This goes into a lesson I skipped about fighting different opponent styles and yourself. Those are the two that I skipped over because they're really lectury. But in that vein of things, you're aware that height has a leverage advantage over, but you're also, we've talked about a few times, that being shorter, you can drop down and make me have to reach more for the undercuts. And if you do high guard undercuts, you know it's pretty much coming from the top. Because my arms are located from my shoulders here, I'm going to be coming down with a cut. So once you cut me in half with undercuts, you gain a positional advantage by being shorter. It's the same reason with the shield, you do the one over the head to cut off and then attack at the legs to prevent weapons from going there. So same concept, that under certain circumstances being lower or shorter is advantageous, not a disadvantage. If I have a pole arm, I have the great reach, and I have the big drop, okay, now the high ground makes a difference. The other things I had were extreme conditions such as heat, humidity, cold, as far as not being appropriately equipped. Like my endurance in high heat, high humidity is pretty bad. A arid, dry air with cool, I'm going to perform much better. Different people are going to have different takes. That goes back to individual tolerances.
Acclimation to climate and also the gear that you're
right. So if you have the right gear, the right acclimation, and you're fighting in a climate with those, it's going to affect your performance. So when you can combine all that in, like part of the reason this is in here is because when you're considering going to a tournament or something like that, what time of year are you going? What kind of armor are you wearing? And that leads into the gear conversation of what's the right gear and what are the terrain considerations you need to place on that when picking your gear.
The Spez AP Light.
Well, and that's why I had like the captain's jacket, because it's hot here in the summer, so I wanted one that was cooler. I just don't particularly like the jacket.
Which one?
The one, is he wearing the captain's one? Yeah, he is. The one he's wearing.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, that's the environmental class and using the arena. I think the coolest part of that, the most likely to actually run across, is the use of palisades.
Not the wall?
So you use the wall here in free play, but some tournaments may actually be in palisades. And most people haven't thought that there's actually times and advantages.
Well, the proper way to use a palisade, so if this is the palisade here, is you take your feather and you set up and you're here and you
with rifle shooting of blades? What?
Yes.
Okay.
And just Marine Corps rifle, marksmanship, whatever you.
Okay. So
that's the correct use. You use it as a barricade. It's the new ARQ range, and there you go. That's the proper use of palisades. Yeah.